How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Lorraine in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida. We're really thinking about everybody in Florida. May everybody be safe. Spencer wishing everyone Gemar Chatima Tova in Connecticut, Tom in PA, Karen in Northern California, Jonathan in Boston for a couple more days, Ella's with us, Marjorie in Georgia, and Michelle in the house. Welcome everybody. Opening a new chapter, chapter 8 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about the law of inheritance, which, of course, very patriarchal system. That's the way the Torah lays it out. But very interesting. I'm going to read you a couple of passages from the Torah. The first from Numbers 27, verses 6 through 11, which is how the daughters of Zelophehad raised an objection to the situation as it was laid out in the Torah up until that time, because their father died without sons, and so was his property going to go to his brothers or some other relative when in fact he had daughters? Moses didn't know the answer to the question. He said, "Let me ask God." Moses was able to do that. God said the daughters of Zelophehad had asked rightly, and the law changed because they asked. Now, what's really interesting here is I'm going to read you, these are the verses which the law of inheritance and Torah law is based on, and they're very sparse. Then we're going to go into this chapter 8, start discussing the first Mishna, and this is a really great illustration of a place where the Torah says this is the basic law. Okay, then we look in the real world, and there's many situations in the real world that aren't covered by the laws which are so sparse and included in the Torah. That's why the Torah said that there's going to be an oral law, an oral tradition, and that you're going to go with questions in each generation to the elders of that generation, who are going to look to that unbroken tradition of the oral law, which goes back all the way to Mount Sinai, and issue rulings. They're not going to just make up the law the way they see fit. They're going to be part of that tradition. But here we'll see how the sages went into the Torah and extracted from the way that the law was worded in the Torah how that law would apply to situations which were not explicitly covered in the Torah. Okay, so our pages tonight, we're going to do a double because they're both short, pages 108 and 109. But let's start with these verses that the law of inheritance is based on. So, Numbers chapter 27, verses 6 through 11. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, the daughters of Zelophehad speak rightly. You shall give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brothers. And you shall pass the inheritance. This word is important. You shall pass the inheritance instead of you shall give the inheritance, as we'll see later. You shall pass his inheritance, their father. You shall pass the inheritance of their father to them, the daughters. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers, right? So his uncles. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it. And it shall be to the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, Deuteronomy 21, verses 15 through 17, if a man has two wives, the one beloved and the other hated. Now, this is when you could have multiple wives. In modern times, it would be a little bit more like, okay, he had a wife, they got divorced, and then he remarried and he had a second wife. And both wives have borne to him children, both the beloved and the hated, right? The second wife and the first wife. And if the firstborn son is hers that was hated, then it shall be in the day that he causes his sons to inherit that which he has, that he may not make the son of the beloved, that he may not make the son of the beloved the firstborn before the son of the hated, who is the firstborn. In other words, first of all, a bechor, a firstborn is called a bechor. Here what we mean is that a woman that her firstborn was a son. Right? So if the firstborn of a woman is a daughter, then there is no firstborn son, just for the purposes of inheritance law. So we don't say the first son to come out of her. We talk about a bechor when the first child that any woman has is a male. That's when this applies. Okay, but let's say that both his first wife and his second wife, their first child was a bechor. Each woman had a male son first. Okay, so the first wife who ended up, let's say, divorcing, or she's this hated wife when it was possible to have two wives, but she was first. And so her bechor came before the bechor of the second wife. Now we have primogeniture under Torah law, which states that a bechor, the firstborn son, and we're talking about the firstborn son, he gets a double portion among his brothers because he is the firstborn. We don't know why, other than the Torah says so. So the point is that if the bechor of this man, the firstborn son of this man, came from this hated wife, and he would like to, for whatever reason, he would like to make the firstborn of his beloved, let's say second wife, have the double portion. So the Torah is going to say he cannot do that, right? The beloved and the hated. And if the firstborn son is hers that was hated, then it shall be in the day that he causes his sons to inherit that which he has, that he may not make the son of the beloved the firstborn before the son of the hated, who is the firstborn, but rather he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the hated wife, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, because he is the first fruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So that's the way that the law is stated. Now we'll get into it. By the way, I'll just say at the outset that in all these laws that we're going to be talking about, very similar to what we were doing in chapter 7, that where there was a purchase and sale and somebody said, I'm selling you a field, and there was no further description, which field, what are the dimensions of the field, exactly how big is the field, where is the field. And then the sages, or the rabbinic court, which ends up litigating the case, has to fill in the details based on the ambiguous wording. Similar, these are the inheritance laws in the absence of a will, right? Similar, there are, statutory inheritance laws under, American law or New York law, California law, etc. And everyone will tell you, every, common sense person, everybody who is careful in giving you good advice is going to tell you, no matter how much or little your assets are, if you have children, make a will, right? You need to make a will, and you don't have to, and I just looked this up before the class, so according to the great Posek, the great Poskening Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, if you make a will and you say that all my children will inherit equally, which is highly advised so that you don't create rancor among your children after you die, that is halakhically valid. You don't have to give the firstborn a double portion. You can just say that all my children will share equally, and there you go. And then what are they sharing equally in? I mean, there's a whole bunch of other laws about that. But right now, we're going to be talking about what is the basic Torah law in the absence of a will. Okay. We're on page 108a, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 8. There are family members who both inherit from and bequeath to each other upon their respective deaths. Goes both ways. And there are those who inherit from certain relatives but do not bequeath to them. And there are those who bequeath to certain relatives but do not inherit from them. And there are those who, despite being relatives, do not inherit from each other and do not bequeath to each other. So the Mishnah lists those referred to above. And these both inherit and bequeath. A father with regard to his sons, and sons with regard to their father, and paternal brothers. All inherit from one another and bequeath to each other, right? It's obvious that if a father dies, his sons inherit from him. But if a son dies, please God, should not happen to anyone. But if a son dies while the father is still alive, the father can inherit from the son. And brothers can inherit from each other, but here they're distinguishing paternal brothers from maternal brothers, right? So brothers who have the same father can inherit from each other. Brothers who only have the same mother but not the same father do not inherit from each other, as we shall see. So those are the ones that can inherit from each other and bequeath to each other. Next category, a man with regard to his mother and a man with regard to his wife, and the sons of sisters, meaning nephews born to the sisters of the deceased. All these inherit from their respective relatives, but they do not bequeath to them, right? So a son can inherit from his mother, but a mother does not inherit from her son. Next category, a woman with regard to her sons and a woman with regard to her husband and maternal uncles, all these bequeath to their respective relatives but do not inherit from them. And the last category, maternal brothers, right? So two brothers who have the same mother but don't have the same father, despite that they are blood relatives, right? They're half brothers. They do not inherit from each other, nor do they bequeath to one another, as they are not considered relatives for the purpose of the law of inheritance, because it's a patriarchal, or maybe more accurate to say a paternal-based system. That is Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. Now the Gemara. The Gemara begins by clarifying the order of the list in our Mishnah. Right? Why did they give the categories in that order? And why within those categories were the particular relatives listed in that order? So ask the Gemara, what is different, i.e., what is the reason that the Mishnah teaches a father with regard to his sons as the first example? let it teach sons with regard to their father as the first example. So the Gemara explains why this would be preferable. One reason is that we do not want to begin with a calamity, as the death of a son during his father's lifetime is a calamity. Therefore, it would have been appropriate to begin with the example of sons inheriting from their father. Now we're on 108b. And furthermore, the verse first states, Numbers 27:8, that a son inherits from his father, as it is written in the portion concerning inheritance, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance to his daughter. So we're talking about a father who dies, leaves an inheritance to the son. Okay, if there's no son, then it goes to the daughter. But right away, we're talking about sons inheriting from their father. It seems like the Mishnah starts talking about that a father can inherit from his son. So the Gemara answers, as for the Tana, the rabbi of our Mishnah, who listed the father inheriting first, since the law that a father inherits from his son is learned through a derivation and is not explicitly mentioned in the Torah, so this law is dear to him, and therefore he listed it first. Now, this tracks with what we constantly find in the Talmud, that in every chapter, we're going to encounter more complicated laws first. Right? So often we start with a really complicated situation, and then later we get to the more basic laws in later Mishnahs, which we might have thought it would make more sense establish the basic laws first, and then from that we'll grow into the more complicated cases. But it doesn't work that way. Why? Because the Mishnah was designed for Torah scholars to teach each other. So they go right into the complicated case. And I'm reminded a little bit of this class that I had when I was a freshman in college. I was a pretty decent student in high school. I took, the advanced calculus class, BC calculus in high school. So freshman year, I placed into an upper level calculus class with other freshmen who were similarly placed. And we had the misfortune of being taught this sort of advanced calculus by an astrophysicist, right? Who for him, advanced calculus was like, arithmetic. So for him, it was fun to teach us, some complicated theorem, and then he would derive it, right? So he would start with the theorem, something quite advanced, and then he would teach us, how the mathematics of calculus arrived at this theorem. And he would fill, if you've seen these kinds of blackboard situations at universities, where there's an upper blackboard and a lower blackboard, and when he fills the lower blackboard, he kind of pushes it up, the upper one comes down, and each blackboard is like a full-size blackboard in a high school classroom, but he's got, 3 lower ones and 3 upper ones. And so he would not only fill all 6 full-size blackboards during the class, but he would often erase them all halfway through the class with a sponge, have his TA do that, and then fill all 6 again. So like 12 full-size blackboards filled with deriving all these equations. That was so complicated, it was completely beyond all of us. And thank God we had once a week a section with the TA, the teacher's assistant, and he would say, of the 100% that he taught you, here's the 5% that you need to know for the exam at the end. Okay. And a lot of us were kind of turned off to calculus and mathematics altogether after that class. Not that I was ever going to be a math major, but right, for the actual aspiring math majors, this was fun. This was good for them. So likewise, the sort of scholars of the Talmud often begin with the most complicated cases, and then as they teach it to their students, they cover everything that's coming up, and then later they just fill in the basic building blocks that you've already covered as you explored the more complicated cases. That's the way I see it. Okay. So we're talking about why does it start with, a father inheriting from his son. And what he's saying is, well, the Torah already tells you that a son inherits from the father. That's obvious. So the Tan of our Mishnah is starting with something a little bit higher level, a little bit more complicated. How do we know that a father inherits from a son? That's not stated explicitly in the Torah. That is derived by rabbinic exegesis. So here he's doing it. And what is the derivation from the Torah that teaches us that a father inherits from his son if, God forbid, the son dies in the father's lifetime? As it is taught in a baraisa concerning the verse from Numbers 27:11, and if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman who is next to him of his family, and he shall inherit it. So this term, his kinsman, she'ero, right? She'ero, his kinsman, this is referring to the deceased's father. And the Torah teaches that the father precedes the brothers of the deceased. So if a man dies and he leaves both brothers and a father, but no children, so then his father inherits from him. And of course, when the father eventually dies, then it'll go to his brothers. So eventually his brothers are going to get it anyway. But what we don't do is that a man dies leaving both a father and brothers, so we, allot his inheritance to his brothers. No, it goes back to the father. His kinsman, this is referring to the father, as the Torah teaches that the father precedes the brothers of the deceased in inheriting from him. Now, one might have thought that the father of the deceased should precede the son of the deceased inheriting from him. Right, so this man does have a son when he dies, and he leaves both a father, and his son. Right, so his son is the grandson of his father. So you might have thought that if he dies and he has a father who's living, that his inheritance would go to his father rather than to his son. Right, that's not so. And how do we know that? One might have thought that the father of the deceased should precede the son of the deceased in inheriting from him. The verse therefore states, quote, next to him, hakarov to him, teaching that the closer one is to the deceased, the earlier one is in the order of inheritance. And the son of a deceased man, is considered to be a closer relative to him than the father of the deceased. Now the Gemara asks, and what did you see to include the son as the closer relative than the father, and to exclude the brother? So if a man dies and he leaves a son, a brother, and a father, so we know the inheritance goes to the son rather than to his father. What about his brother? Why do you give it to his son rather than to his brother? It seems obvious to us. Children always inherit from the parent. But if he leaves a brother, why not give it to the brother? How do we know that it doesn't go to the brother if all the Torah says is you give it to the closest relative? So how do you know? And the Gemara answers, I include the son as he stands in place of his father to designate a Hebrew maidservant as a wife for himself, which a brother does not have the legal authority to do. In other words, in another place in the Torah, we see that a son has a certain legal ability to designate a Hebrew maidservant for himself, which a brother does not have. And similarly, the son stands in place of his father with regard to the law of redemption of an ancestral field. If a son redeems a field consecrated by his father, it is considered as though the father himself redeemed it, and the field returns to the family in the Jubilee year. By contrast, if the brother of the one who consecrated it redeems the field, it does not return to the family. We learned that in Leviticus 27:16 through 21. Now, the Gemara asks, well, on the contrary, I should include the brother as the closer relative, because if you're going to bring in precedents from other areas of the law, well, then let's look at the law of inheritance with respect to a man who dies childless, but leaves a wife and a brother. Yibum, which we talked about so much in Tractate Yevamos. Right? So there, a brother seems to have a stronger place. On the contrary, I should include the brother as the closer relative, as he stands in his brother's place with regard to yibum, levirate marriage, and a son does not, right? If a man dies childless and he leaves a brother and a wife, so his brother marries his wife. Now, the wife and the brother don't have to do that. They can perform chalitza and get out of it. But if they choose to get married, the purpose of that is that their firstborn will stand as the inheritor of the man who died before he had children. Right? So his brother steps in and makes sure that that guy has an heir. So since a brother can stand directly in the shoes of a brother who dies, and a son doesn't, marry his mother when his father dies, so you would think perhaps a brother is a closer relative than a son. And the Gemara answers, what are you talking about? This is not a valid claim, as is there yibum, except in a case where there is no son. The only reason a brother steps into the deceased brother's shoes and marries his wife is because there is no child. If there was a child, there would be no yibum. In a case where there is a son, there is no yibum. There is no levirate marriage. And this indicates that a son stands in the place of the deceased before a brother, even with regard to levirate marriage. And the Gemara comments, the reason that a son is considered to be a closer relative than a brother is specifically due to this refutation that where there is a son, there is no yibum. And this indicates that without this refutation, I would say that a brother is superior to a son in terms of how close a relative he is. And the Gemara therefore asks, well, why not derive that a son is closer to the deceased than a brother from the fact that here there are two examples of the superiority of a son, designation with regard to a Hebrew maidservant, and redemption of an ancestral field. And here there is only one demonstration of the superiority of a brother, levirate marriage. And levirate marriage doesn't even work anyway, so don't we already have it a proof that a son is closer to a man than his brother? So the Gemara answers, with regard to redemption of an ancestral field itself, the Tana establishes his ruling from this same reason. Is there yibum, except in a case where there is no son? In a case where there is a son, there is no yibum. The determination that the redemption of the ancestral field by a son is in place of the redemption of the field by the father, whereas the redemption of the field by a brother is not, is based on the reasoning that the law of yibum is not an indication that a brother is a closer relative of the son. Therefore, the law of an ancestral field cannot be regarded as a second separate example of the son's superiority to the brother, as it stems from the first example of yibum. So now the Gemara suggests an alternative derivation. Let's track where we are. We're explaining how we know, since the Torah doesn't say it explicitly, how do we know that the son of a man is considered to be a closer relative to that man than his brother? We're still deriving that. So why should the father of the deceased inherit before only the brothers? Say that he should inherit before the daughter of the deceased as well by interpreting the verse as follows, right? So in other words, if a man dies and he has no son, then his father inherits from him. Well, what if he has no son, but he has daughters? Does his father inherit before his daughters do? Let's keep reading. Say that he should inherit before the daughter of the deceased as well, by interpreting the verse as follows. When we say his kinsman, this is referring to the father, and the Torah teaches that the father precedes the daughter of the deceased in inheriting from him. One might have thought that the father of the deceased man should precede the son of the deceased in inheriting from him. The verse therefore states, next, hakarov, like closest to him, teaching that the closer one is to the deceased, the earlier one is in the order of inheritance. If I didn't say it before, we are on page 109a now. This suggestion is rejected, since with regard to the matter of yibum, of levirate marriage, a son and a daughter are equivalent, meaning if a man has had any children before he dies and he leaves a wife and a brother, there is no yibum because he had children. Whether it was a son or a daughter, there now is no yibum. The only time yibum happens is when a man has had no children and he leaves a wife and a brother. Then they may choose to marry, and their firstborn will be legally considered the heir of the guy who died childless. So if there's any child, son or daughter, there is no yibum. And because of this, it stands to reason that with regard to the matter of inheritance as well, a son and a daughter are equivalent, and that the father does not precede the daughter. So, okay, he died without a son, but he left a daughter. Why should his father, who's still alive, inherit before his daughter does? So the Gemara suggests an alternative derivation. Why should the father of the deceased inherit before the brothers of the deceased? Say that he should inherit only before his own brothers, by interpreting the verse as follows, meaning that, like you were saying, that the father is ahead of the deceased's brothers. Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he's only ahead of his own brothers. In other words, the uncles of the deceased. But that his brothers would inherit ahead of the father. That's not the law, but we're still figuring out how we got there. His kinsman. This is referring to the father. And the Torah teaches that the father precedes the father's brothers in inheriting the deceased, from the deceased. One might have thought that the father of the deceased should precede the brothers of the deceased in inheriting from him. The verse states, Hakarov, next to, teaching that the closer one is to the deceased, the earlier one is in the order of inheritance. And the Gemara responds, a verse is not necessary to teach that the father of the deceased inherits before the father's brothers, for the following reason. By whose virtue do the father's brothers come to inherit from the deceased? By virtue of the father. In other words, if a man dies and he has no children and he has no father, then who inherits? And he has no brothers either. Only then would his uncles, his father's surviving brothers, inherit. So they can inherit, right? A man, the uncle can. If a man dies, he has no kids, no brothers, no father. Then his father's brothers can inherit if they are still alive. Why is that? By whose virtue do these uncles come to inherit from the deceased? By virtue of the father of the deceased, as their right to inherit is a result of their being brothers of the father of the deceased. Could it be that while the father is still alive, his brothers should inherit? Of course not. So the Gemara therefore concludes that the father precedes the brothers of the deceased. If he's going to precede some set of brothers, it's not his own brothers, it's the brothers of the deceased. As we said before, if a man dies, he leaves no children, he has brothers and a father who inherits his father. Now the Gemara challenges, but the verses are not written that way. As it is written, if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. That's what it specifically says, Numbers 27:10. And only later is it written, and if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman who is next to him, indicating that the father, whose right to inherit is derived from the term kinsman, inherits only after the brothers of the deceased and his own brothers. And the Gemara explains the verses are not written in order, since, as explained earlier, it is not reasonable that the father's brothers inherit before the father. Therefore, it must be that the inheritance of the father is not written in its proper place, and he may inherit even before the brothers of the deceased. From the order of the people mentioned in the verses, we don't learn out the order of inheritance. We learn out the order of inheritance from the logical deductions of language of situations that are not addressed explicitly, and the rabbis are deriving what are those logical deductions. New subject. The Gemara records an additional derivation for the law, right? Another way to derive the law, that the father precedes the brothers of the deceased. And this Tana cites it from here. Tana, Rabbi of the Mishna, cites it from here as it is taught in a Baraisa. Baraisas are contemporaneous with Mishnas. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, taught this law. It is written, Numbers 27:8, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance to his daughter. Now, in the rest of the passage, the verse employs the phrase, and you shall give. It is only in this verse that it employs the phrase, and you shall pass. So based on this, Rabbi Yishmael teaches that in a case where there is a daughter, you pass an inheritance to her from one who appears to have precedence, namely the father. And by inference, you do not pass the inheritance from the father in a case where there are brothers of the deceased. So a man died, he didn't have sons, but he has a daughter. Where does it go? To the daughter. But we learn out from the language or the fact that it goes to the daughter using the phrase you shall pass rather than you shall give, that if there was no daughter, the father would precede the brothers of the deceased. The Gemara asks, but why not say that in a case where there is a daughter, you pass the inheritance to her from the brothers, but you do not pass an inheritance from the father, even in a case where there is a daughter, so that the father of the deceased precedes the daughter of the deceased in the order of inheritance? And the Gemara answers, if that were so, the merciful one would not write, then you shall pass the inheritance to his daughter. This indicates that the logical order of inheritance is being overridden, as the fact that a daughter precedes the brothers of the deceased is due to her being a closer relative of his. It is obvious that the Torah intends that she precede not only the brothers of the deceased, but also the father of the deceased if he is still alive. Now we're on page 109b. Having quoted two derivations for the law, that the father of the deceased precedes the brothers of the deceased in inheritance law, the Gemara proceeds to discuss them and asks, and according to the one who derives, now since we have two different derivations, are we going to be able to learn the same laws from the derivations? What's the difference between them? Having quoted these two derivations, now we discuss them. And according to the one who derives that the father inherits ahead of the brothers of the deceased, according to the one who derives this from the term, and you shall pass, what does he do with this term, his kinsman, which was said to refer to the father of the deceased? And the Gemara answers, he requires it for that which is taught in a Baraisa, his kinsman. This term, his kinsman, can refer to the father, but it can also refer to the wife. This is referring to his wife. And the Torah teaches that a husband inherits from his wife. Now, under this system, in the absence of a will, if a man dies and he leaves a wife and a son, now the normal thing on secular law is that the wife inherits, right? And then it's up to her to take care of the son. This is the absence of a will. But under this system of law, if a man dies and he leaves a son and a wife, the son inherits. Now the wife does have a right to be sustained from the estate, but she doesn't inherit the estate. She'll be okay. She'll be protected. God forbid, the son doesn't like the wife. Maybe it's a second wife. He has obligations to make sure she is sustained, but she doesn't inherit in the absence of a will. However, if a wife dies, the husband inherits from her. Patriarchal system. Now, the Gemara asks, and according to the one, and why is that? Because remember that the husband had an obligation to sustain the wife all the days that they were married. The wife didn't have an obligation to sustain the husband. They could override this law. Remember that she could say, I don't want to be sustained by you. I'm bringing lots of money into the marriage, or I'm a professional. I have a bigger income than you. I don't need to be sustained by you. That would change the law of inheritance later. But that's outside the scope of what we're talking now. Now the Gemara asks, and according to the one who derives it from the term, his kinsman, that a father inherits ahead of brothers, rather than he shall pass, rather they derive this law from the term, his kinsman, what does he do with the term, and you shall pass? So the one who derives that the father inherits ahead of the brothers from the phrase, his kinsman, from and you shall pass, he requires that phrase for that which is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, in the context of all the relatives listed in the passage detailing the laws of inheritance, it is stated concerning them with the terminology of giving, and only here, in the context of daughters, it is stated concerning them with the terminology of passing. So this teaches us that you have no one who passes an inheritance of land in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, from one tribe to another, except for a daughter, since her son and husband inherit from her. Right? A son and a husband inherit from a daughter. That means that if she inherited something from her father, and she came from the tribe of Judah, but she married a man from the tribe of Benjamin, then when she dies, her property goes to her son or her husband, and that would mean that property went from the ancestral holdings of Judah to now the holdings of Benjamin. And that can happen because sons and husbands inherit from mothers and wives. New subject. The Gemara returns to discuss the interpretation of the term his kinsman. And from where does one know to derive that with regard to the term his kinsman, she'ero, this is referring to the father? As it is written in the context of forbidden sexual relations, she is your father's kinswoman, she'er, from Leviticus 18:12. So since this term kinsman, right, close relative, is used to refer to a woman in the context of prohibited sexual relations, why over here in the law of inheritance are we saying that close relative refers to a male, to the father? Why couldn't it refer to the mother? Perhaps one should say instead his kinswoman, and this is referring to the mother, as it is also written, for she is your mother's kinswoman in Leviticus 18:13. Since the same term, close relative, is referring to women in the law of prohibited sexual relations, maybe we should use that term to refer to women in the law of inheritance. Rava said in response that the verse states here with respect to inheritance, then you shall give his inheritance to his kinsman who is next to him of his family, and he shall inherit it. Emphasizing that kinsman is referring specifically to someone who is of his family, and it is the father's family that is called, legally speaking, one's family, while one's mother's family is not called one's family. And proof for this is found in another verse, as it is written, by their families, by their fathers' houses, right? So in this ancient law, and we still see this today, I'm a Levite because my father was a Levite, right? My mother, we don't know, but because so much was lost in the Holocaust. But as far as I know, my mother's father was not a Levite or even a Cohen. And even if he was, that status would not pass to me. I'm a Levite because my father was a Levite. If somebody's from the tribe of Judah, his son is from the tribe of Judah. So in other words, when we talk about families, legally speaking, we're talking about paternal, right? Paternal line. Now, it's interesting that what defines a Jew is that his mother was Jewish or her mother was Jewish. That's a separate issue than the law of inheritance. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty. And is one's mother's family indeed not called one's family? Again, and this is why a mother doesn't inherit from her son, though a son can inherit from his mother, and why brothers who have the same mother but have different fathers don't inherit from each other. Because your inheritance is associated with your father's family, right? And not with your mother's family. But now the Gemara is challenging it. And is one's mother's family indeed not called one's family? But it is written in the episode of Micha, or in English Micah, forming an idol to be worshipped, right? Very wicked. And we saw this in the book of Judges, chapter 17, verse 7, where it says, and there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. So already we have a problem, right? Levites are descendants of Levi, right? So the 12 sons of Jacob, the first was Reuben, the second was Shimon, and the third was Levi, and the fourth was Judah. And then there were 8 more. Is this guy father, paternal line? Are you a descendant of Judah or are you a descendant of Levi? Here it says, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite. What does that mean? And he sojourned there. It's one or the other. How can you be of the family of Judah and he was a Levite? Maybe it means that you can be of your mother's family can count for you. That's the challenge. So the Gemara explains the difficulty. This matter itself is difficult. You said, who was a Levite, as apparently he came from the tribe of Levi. But the verse says, of the family of Judah. So apparently he came from the tribe of Judah. Rather, is it not that his father was from the tribe of Levi and his mother was from the tribe of Judah? And yet the verse says that he was of the family of Judah. So this appears to prove that one's mother's family, legally speaking, is also called his family. Rav bar Rav Chanan said in response, no, you're misunderstanding it. The verse speaks of a man whose name was Levi, not that he was a Levite, but his father was of the tribe of Judah. The Gemara asks, if that is so, how is that which Micah said when the man agreed to serve as his priest? Now I know that the Lord will do me good, seeing that I have a Levite as my priest. Now, this whole thing is about avodah zarah. It's about idolatry. This is a wicked man who I guess not only worshipped an idol, but recruited some other Jew who he's calling a Levite to engage in idolatry with him. How is this to be understood? It is understood only if he was an actual Levite, not if he was from the tribe of Judah and named Levi or Levi. Rav bar Rav Chanan responded, yes, it is understood. Micah understood the fact that a man whose name is Levi happened upon him as an auspicious sign that his idolatry was going to be okay. Gemara asks further, but is it so that his name was indeed Levi? But wasn't his name Jonathan? As it is stated in Judges 18:30, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Menashe, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites. Priests? We're talking about Kohanim? Kohanim are descendants of Moses' brother Aaron. They also happen to be Levites, but they're more specific. They're descendants of Aaron. So what are we talking about? His sons were priests, okay, to the tribe of the Danites? Okay, maybe they're serving in some capacity for the tribe of the Danites, which is another one of the 12 brothers. But if we say that Jonathan was the son of Gershom, was the son of Menashe, are we going to say that this is a line of Kohanim? Rav bar Rav Chanan said to him, and according to your reasoning that his name was not Levi, but that he was from the tribe of Levi, there is also a difficulty from that same verse. But is it so that he was the son of Menashe, but wasn't the son of Moses? Wasn't he the son of Moshe? As it is written, the sons of Moshe, Gershom and Eliezer. So now we're talking about a son of Gershom. Gershom was the son of Moses, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, the prophet. So Moses had 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Sounds like this guy that we're talking about that maybe went bad was a direct descendant of Moshe. Well, if he's a descendant of Moshe, he's a Levite. He's not a Cohen, right? Because that's the wrong line. It was Moses' brother Aaron who was the Cohen. In any case, then he is a Levite, not some guy named Levi. He is a Levite. So Rav bar Rav Chanan explains the verse. Rather, although he was the son of Moshe, or a descendant of Moshe, because he acted like Menashe, the king of Judah, wicked king of Judah. Menashe was a guy who was a very wicked king. He tried to make tshuva, to make an atonement. He ruled for a very long time, 55 years. First, I think 22 years, if I got the numbers right, I could be remembering wrong, but I recall he did 22 years of idolatry, and then he spent 33 years trying to atone for it. But the idolatry that he did, meaning a king who led the whole nation into idolatry, yeah, he wasn't really able to atone for that, even though he was, trying to be a better person for a long time. So he's remembered as a very wicked king who not only pursued idolatry, but who led the nation into idolatry. That's why it's so wicked. So, rather, although he was a descendant of Moshe, because he acted like Menashe, the wicked Menashe, the verse linked him to Menashe by calling him the son of Menashe. Now, this is something that we do in Hebrew quite a bit. For example, we say that a person is a bar mitzvah. Like when he turns 13, it's not, we say he has a bar mitzvah. That's kind of weird English. Really what we're saying is that you are now obligated in the mitzvahs because you've become, legally speaking, an adult. But what we're literally saying is he is the son of mitzvahs. No, you can't be the son of mitzvahs. The mitzvah's not a person. What we mean is that we are obligated in mitzvahs. You are somebody that's now, in the house of mitzvahs, as it were. So being a son of, that terminology can be used not just literally to be the son of some man, but also to be associated with something. So here, somebody who acted very wickedly is associated with the wicked Menashe, and he's called the son of Menashe for that reason. Says this interpretation by Rava bar Rav Chana. Where am I? Because he acted like Menashe. So the verse linked him to Menashe by calling him a son of Menashe. And here too, in the verse from which you seek to prove that one's mother's family is called one's family, since he acted like Menashe, who came from the tribe of Judah, the verse linked him to Judah by stating that he was of the family of Judah, even though he was in fact a Levite. He really was a Levite, but he's being associated with the wicked Menashe, who came from Judah, and that's why he's also being called of the family of Judah. That's how they're dealing with this difficulty. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So in connection with this, Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, from here it is learned that corruption is linked to one who is corrupt, as this man was linked to Menashe and to the tribe of Judah, and therefore to Judah, despite having no familial connection to them. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says that concept can be seen in another place, in the matter of Adonijah, the son of David, King David. From 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 6, and he was also a very handsome man, and she gave birth to him after Absalom. But Adonijah wasn't the son of Haggith, and Absalom was the son of Maacah. I don't know why it says wasn't the son of Haggith, and Absalom was the son of Maacah. There might be a little misprint here, but the point is that they had different mothers, and it's like they're being associated with the same mother. Why? Because both of these sons acted wickedly. Right? So rather, since Adonijah acted in a manner fit for Absalom, since both of these sons ended up rebelling against their father, rebelling against the monarchy of King David, so the verse linked him to Absalom, referring to him as his full brother, as if they had the same mother, even though they didn't have the same mother. Here too, with regard to the Jonathan that we're talking about in the book of Judges, since he acted like the wicked Menashe acted, the verse linked him to Menashe. It's also a little bit confusing because I'm sure that King Menashe is much later than what's going on in the book of Judges. So I don't know if we're talking about a different Menashe or if this is some kind of foreshadowing in the Bible. And I apologize that I didn't have a chance to look into that more thoroughly before the class started. Okay, that's where we're going to knock off for today. Let us take some questions. Jonathan, besides the laws for the daughters, was novel that daughters would inherit, and that this was added to the Torah because of the question of the daughters of Slofchad. It was also a novel example of a leader saying, I don't know, let me go ask. A nice example of Moses' humility. Beautiful, Jonathan. Wonderful teaching, and one that's so important. In fact, we are interviewing now. We're going to be hiring somebody to work at our company. And one of the things we talk about in interviews is it's okay not to know, but when you don't know, ask, right? To not know is fine. To not know and not ask, that's problematic. Sharon, can't a person write a will about whom he wants to inherit from him, or must it always be based on how close a family member is? You probably wrote that before we said, yes, you can write whatever you want in your will. These laws are in the absence of a will. Joe, when uncles inherit, is it based on the order of their ages, with the oldest getting the double portion? Great question. I hope we'll cover that later. I don't know. I get the sense, that if uncles are going to inherit, they're just going to divide equally, even if one of them happens to be a Bechor. But I'm not sure. Stay tuned. Lucy, if a son from the tribe of Judah inherits land from his mother of the tribe of Benjamin, is that inheritance permanent, or does it return to the ancestral lands of Benjamin in the Jubilee year? Wonderful question. I was thinking that as we were reading it. They didn't address it there. If it doesn't go back in the Jubilee year, then you could very easily get a hodgepodge, right, of holdings where, the sort of the way the land was divvied up so that, the tribes had holdings in the tribal regions of Israel. You're going to end up having Benjamites owning land in Judah and Judahites owning land in Benjamin, etc. So I'm not sure if it goes back to the ancestral division or not. At any rate, once the first temple was destroyed and the exile happened, that was the end of redistribution at the Yovel, at the Jubilee year. But even if we're talking about the way it was meant to be until that time, and it was almost 1,000 years where it was handled that way, I don't know if in that case it goes back or not. It seems like they're saying, well, let's see. There's a note about that. Where was it? It says this is the only case where land goes out. You have no one who passes an inheritance in the land of Israel from one tribe to another, except for a daughter, since her son and husband inherit from her. This would mean that in any case, a father would precede a daughter in the order of inheritance. See, it's really only being used here for the purpose of who inherits, between a father and a daughter. And the question you're asking is not answered here, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this was practiced back then. Great question. Elvis, as a convert, I have no tribal affiliation. I'm simply Israel ben Avraham. So as a man who was born with a Jewish soul and given the challenge by Hashem to see if I could make it back to Judaism of my own free will, I hope that I have been successful thus far. Sounds to me like you've been very successful. Here you are every day learning Talmud, just very high level study for any Jew. And, you bring down an important and very wonderful idea that who are the converts? We understand that they were Jewish souls who somehow find themselves out among the nations, and they felt that calling to come back. And it's not that they're just joining in, but rather these are souls that were at Mount Sinai, somehow got scattered among the nations. And why did you feel that calling? Because your Jewish soul was always longing to come back. So a question that perhaps you're alluding to is when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, and we're all called back to Israel, are there going to be familial holdings, ancestral holdings of land? I don't know, and my instinct is, I don't know. So I start by saying I don't know. My instinct is the land is going to be redistributed in some way. Because the land of Israel is going to grow like much bigger, sort of, miraculously, because all the Jews are coming back, right? Not just the Jews who are there, but millions and millions and millions of Jews who've lived, throughout all time, since Abraham. So since we're all going to be called back in the resurrection of the dead, etc., and the land is going to expand, so there's going to be some kind of division. I bet it'll be based on the original distribution of land at the time of the conquest by Joshua leading in the children of Israel. But it would also have to accommodate all these people. And therefore, converts over all these centuries will also have a place and will receive some kind of a holding. How that's going to be done, who knows? No one knows. We'll find out when Mashiach comes. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.